Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the panel. We're going to speak about COVID and COVID compliance today. I'm Mike Fantasia. I'm the president of the Location Managers Guild International. And with us, we have a couple of our members, location managers from around the world. We've got Markus Bensch in Germany, Ilt Jones here in Los Angeles, and John Rakich in lovely Toronto. We were going to have Georgette Turner from England. We were excited to have Georgette because she is a location manager, and she's also been a COVID production manager on a show in the UK. But she emailed early this morning and said that they had 3 positive tests on her show, so she has to deal with that. So she can't join us today, unfortunately. So we'll carry on without Georgette. It's going to be a free-form panel. I'll ask a few questions. I'll ask each of the 3 panelists to answer the question to the best of their ability. And then we'll take some questions from the audience. So I'd like to start out asking everybody. I'll start with Markus and then go to Ilt and then John. How has COVID changed the way that you scout for locations on a film? Go ahead, Markus. I'll let you kick off.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mike. Well, the main difference for me is because usually we have people coming in from overseas. So the main difference for me is that people don't come anymore. So they just phone or send me a briefing or something, but they haven't been here in person for about 8 months or so. That was the last time I saw somebody from abroad to scout. We have a couple of shows which are filming right now in Berlin or Babelsberg. But obviously they were scouted before the lockdown in March. So it hasn't. The only real difference is that I don't see people in person anymore. So I talk to people, but I just go out just as usual. So in Germany, everybody is pretty good at wearing masks. So you can go to places, look at places, talk to people, and that hasn't really changed. So the next step will be the difference when we start scouting, like we're doing tech scouts or whatever, or director scouts. So that will be a difference. So we will have more cars and stuff. But up to now, it has been really busy and really good. So and we're looking forward to the next year, actually.
You let them tackle that?
The difference is now that whereas previously the quality of the catering used to be a matter of life and death on a film set, now filming in the time of COVID is actually a matter of life and death. So, everything is geared towards that. Everything is seen through the prism of that. Excuse me. Just the way we're scouting parking before we're scouting the locations. So, we're making sure we're not putting people in shuttle vans. So it's all through the prism of COVID rather than through the prism of filmmaking. That's the big difference here.
John?
Yeah, so in the case of the show I'm currently on, we were in the midst of production when we shut down for the pandemic. So we restarted. We did a lot of our scouting in advance, and now it's been more photographs. But when we do go out, it's no longer one vehicle with everyone. It's 12 to 18 vehicles with one person in each one. And what Ilta said is true, is you now start basing less on the creative, more on the logistics, because the footprint's gotten larger, where we don't want a shuttle. We've got intake tents and COVID processing and all this extra stuff that's come that we now try to base ourselves without having to move our unit around. Technology's come in more and more people are doing remote scouting. Everyone's buying 3D cameras just because it's the novel thing right now. It's becoming a slow hybrid. It's still taking its time. I mean, we're extremely busy up here, and there's still single scouts going out and taking photographs and showing stuff the old way.
I know for me, I scouted a couple weeks ago with our designer and set decorator, and we had very strict requirements from Apple. We could not engage anybody who would not wear a mask, so we had plenty of extra masks with us, and most people complied. Some people didn't, so we just wouldn't go into their space. We're trying to take time in advance if we know we want to go into a space to make sure that it's either empty of people or we can get people to mask up with us. it's an interesting process. We also, we had 13 people between locations and the art department designer in 13 cars, and I can't wait till we do our tech scout. John, you mentioned remote and 3D scouting. Did you have you well, all three of you, have you employed that? Or they've got these bubble cameras now like realtors use. Have any of you had experience with those systems? John?
I have a 360 camera that I've had for a while just for documenting rooms. The show I'm on, we're outside a lot more, so we're not really needing to do that. But a few people in Toronto here have, they've got the Matterport camera or the Insta360 or the Ricoh, and it's mostly what Markus had said. Creatives don't want to come up here until they have to, because in Canada, as soon as you come in the country, you're locked into a 2-week quarantine. So they want to see as much as they can ahead of time, and usually they like to see it in a 360 degree if they can.
Mm-hmm. Markus, have you used it?
No, I haven't. It's basically same as it ever was for me, to be honest. Mm-hmm. But as John just said, so I've got a couple of scouts coming up in December, and people are coming over from the States, and now they have to work out when they go back to the States after that week of scouting in Germany. They will be in quarantine in New York for a week or so, or for 2 weeks. So you have to take that into account. So you can fly into Germany, but you can't leave, basically. Mm-hmm. So,
a Hotel California.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you use 3D on your show?
I had the advantage of starting scouting after a bunch of friends had started scouting using 360 cameras. And what they found was that it's all very well to get all this fancy data from 360 cameras, but still the creators were saying there's no substitute for standing in the actual space. You can do as much as you like in terms of, having this sort of the joystick guide around a house on the computer, but that wasn't found to be acceptable. So when we went out and scouted with the creatives, we just took the usual precautions. We traveled in separate cars. Everybody wore masks. Everybody did their best to stay 6 feet apart and hope for the best. And it was fine. All the things you do in normal life, and it was much better than. Obviously there are situations where perhaps it makes more sense to do so, but we found that as long as we took the social precautions, it was fine.
Mm-hmm. For each of you, how much extra have you had to deal with on your production? Extra time, extra money, extra space for parking, background processing, catering, that kind of thing. We've all done this long enough to know that we look at a script, we look at our extras breakdown, we look at our schedule, and we sort of know what we need. How much extra of everything have you guys had to throw into a production? John, I'll start with you.
A lot. Space is the big thing. Everything, a tent that we used to sit 100 people in now sits 30, because everyone has to be spaced 6 feet apart, 2 meters apart. The footprints become larger. And then on some shows like mine, you have to set up the COVID unity space, which is trucks for testing, intake. The footprint's gotten much, much larger. So is the crew. This conception that in the time of COVID, the crew would get smaller is not true. It's gotten bigger. There's so many more people around, between cleaners, medics. We've become more, logistics is driving everything now. And it takes more time.
And did you find that, how are you handling like catering? Were you used to jumping in a shuttle van and driving to a catering tent? Is there more?
Yeah, it's funny. My show was already, a lot of shows here were doing what we were doing before, which was rolling lunches. We don't break. The caterers have all based on some sort of, our caterers in town here, most of them have an app that you can pre-order your food ahead of time. And you go pick up a box lunch, and in small groups, people have a chance to eat. There's no more of that shutting down for an hour and then restarting. It's, most studios are putting in a cap of 10 hours of shooting. So it's become more interesting. People seem to like it because you're getting to go home a little earlier than you used to.
I was going to ask if it shortened your day a bit for the crew.
And added more time to the schedule. Yeah.
Right. Ilt, did you find the same on your show?
Yeah, I like John's characterization of it as interesting. That's not the first adjective I I would come across. A pain in the ass is the first thing I would describe it as. But it's, again, as I said at the beginning, it's a matter of life and death. The continuous hours for lunches has helped quite a bit, because instead of trying to sit down 150 people, you're sitting down a maximum of 50 to 60. So that's counteracted some of the additional expense. But yeah, I mean, whereas previously you in the lunch line, you'd go down the chafing dishes and you'd point at things. Now you're doing that through a wall of plastic. We were very impressed by the caterers, although Greta Thunberg would have a fit when she saw the amount of plastic being thrown away, because instead of metal knives and forks, now it's all disposable stuff. So you know, they've done their best to use compostable knives, forks, plates, and whatever. But we noticed there was a lot of trash that was just going straight to the dumpster. So it's having a detrimental effect in many respects, budgetarily and also environmentally as well. So a piece of advice I would have is work hard on that aspect of it to counteract the horrendous waste that's going to come about at the beginning of all this.
Markus, have you been involved in a production, or have you just been scouting? Markus?
No, we've got 2 big productions right now, or one just finished and the other one will finish next week. So basically the same patterns everywhere. So we need more space, obviously, and again that whole plastic or bamboo cutlery stuff. Time to check everybody, check the temperature and stuff like that. But I find it quite interesting how fast you actually adapt to it. Because when we started, like, don't know, 4 or 5 months ago, everybody thought this is never going to work. And after a week or two, people just get used to it, get used to getting tested, get used to taking the temperatures and stuff like that. And it was pretty smooth, actually, what we did here. And obviously there are downsides like the garbage thing and stuff. But apart from that, it was pretty smooth, to be honest.
From what I have heard, I haven't actually been on a production since all this cranked up. I'm about to start, but from what I've heard from some of my friends who are filming, they find that people are complaining less about the little things. You know, as Ilt said early on, you know, nobody's bitching about the catering anymore. Nobody's complaining about anything because they realize this is life and death situation. And
6 months of unemployment changes everyone's disposition. It's time to be serious. It's time to work. No one's here to mess around or screw things up. Everyone knows that we're all moving together in one way, and that's the only way this will work.
Yeah, it's been a huge reality check for a lot of the people. I've often said that a lot of film crew members are overpaid babies, and now they realize they're lucky to be working in a cool, fun, interesting environment, albeit with some strictures imposed by the COVID protocols. But I think a lot of people can't believe they're lucky stars that they're working and being well paid, whereas previously those weren't considerations. Yeah,
it's amazing how a small virus can change your perspective.
Yeah.
You know,
what I found, it takes a bit of the fun out, isn't it? So because obviously you can't just stand next to somebody and chat, or people just don't do that, because people try to get away from each other as far as possible, and everybody's wearing a mask all the time. So it's definitely work. It's not a social event anymore, like it used to be sometimes, at least, only lucky.
Although I'd still maintain that the worst day on a film set is better than the best day in a factory.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. One thing that COVID will do is, one thing that always bugs me is how much hugging is going on a film set. Everybody's hugging each other. So we've done away with that, thank God.
Yeah.
Let me ask this question. From the time you started your project to today, have the COVID requirements changed at all? Have your approach to the COVID requirements changed? How are you know, we're very proud of being flexible in the film business. So I'd like to ask each of you if the requirements have changed since you started, and then how you adjusted to them. Ilt, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think I was lucky that I started after a lot of other people in Los Angeles, and I was able to sort of pick their brains. And one thing that has evolved, and it definitely did on my shoot, was that initially they put people like medical personnel in charge of the COVID protocols directly with the crew, or they put people who had sort of paramedic or military medic backgrounds in. Whereas it's evolved where they've put people with a production background, like a first AD or a production manager, which is what happened in my case, because a film crew is a strange and wonderful and quirky organism with peculiar dynamics and rhythms that only somebody who's worked in production can understand. So having somebody who's in charge of administrating the COVID protocols, the dissemination of PPE and so on and so forth, it's better to have somebody who has a production background than a medical background. That person can take advice from the medical personnel who are in overall charge of things. But in terms of the actual day-to-day administration of the COVID protocols, it's much better to have somebody who understands the rhythms and dynamics of a film set and a film crew.
That's interesting. I know early on my production, we were thinking, well, we've got to have a doctor, we've got to have an EMT, we've got to have a nurse. So it's interesting to hear that perspective. Markus?
It's interesting that you say that, because on the two shows we had parallel, on the one show we had a guy with a medical background in charge. The other show was with a production guy in charge. And now guess who had most cases? So the guy, where the medical guy was in charge, we had more cases than where the production guy was in charge. And that was really interesting to see. Plus, obviously, nobody really took, and I think that was part of the problem, that nobody really took the medical guy seriously, because obviously there are certain ways to talk to film people and to handle problems and stuff. And if you haven't seen that, or if it's not in your DNA, then it's really, really hard to get into that. So yeah, it is definitely advisable to have a production guy in charge there.
Was there conflict between the two, between the medical and production?
No, those were two different shows.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so basically an A and a B group, and so the medical group didn't do so well. Plus, obviously, he stepped on many toes, that medical guy, and the other group was much better, I think.
We have both on ours. The head of our health and safety squad is a medical professional, but everyone underneath is production based, so that she draws on their knowledge. We go to her for any kind of medical questions. How many people go in a room? And they do actually come visit sets before we start to assess what they think they need, when a medic needs to be there. We found that it's better to have both. And early on, we let them know, if you don't know something, feel free to ask us. We'll help you. You want to know suppliers that you need for equipment. So it's become more harmonious on our show. Just, you still need someone who understands the public policy and the public health aspect to interpret. So we've got, between our studio's guidelines, we spent months working on our own province's guidelines, and then the industry. It's been public health. It's nice to have a bit of both.
So that was the same thing in our situation. The sort of the tip of the pyramid was a medical professional who understood the public policy and also the medical aspect of it. But they didn't actually deal with the crew. The person below them with production experience dealt with the crew. Yeah. And as Markus said, it was in their DNA. They understood how to speak to a crew member, which is, not always easy.
Yeah. So ultimately, production dealt with all of the day-to-day on the ground stuff. And the medical person was there to offer their opinion on a specific case or a specific situation, or yes, this person can go home and that person is going to quarantine, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, plus obviously you have in Germany, you have to report cases once they come up immediately. And especially in the beginning, or a couple of months ago, there were quite a lot of false positives. So that medical guy always reported those immediately without checking. So that led to a few people spending a lot of time at home. And then if you check again 2 hours later or so, you probably have the right, a negative. So that took a bit of time to get used to, that if somebody is tested positive, check again just in case, like half an hour later or an hour later. And then finally you will come up with the right result. Sometimes it's positive and sometimes it's negative.
Okay. I'm not sure if we touched on this, but I'll ask the question. We may have for each of you. What's the biggest revelation that you had while dealing with COVID during production? Anyone have a revelation?
Well, I found it quite interesting that, at least as far as I know, because we tested so much, like some people, like on the one show, 50 people were tested every day, like the core group was tested every day, and then the next 100 were tested every 3 days, every 2 days, and so on. And it was really interesting to see that when there were cases, and there weren't many, like a handful or so over the last couple of months, when there were cases, it was always after the weekend, and they didn't spread it within the crew, because obviously people wore a mask to stayed apart from each other and washed their hands. So basically, if you follow those basic protocols, you are pretty safe. That's what I thought anyway. So, and if people got sick, they got it from parties or wherever they went, but not from the film set. And that I thought that was pretty interesting to see.
Exactly. I mean, I would say not so much a revelation as a confirmation that wearing masks and social distancing works.
Yeah.
We had a huge crew working together for weeks and weeks, and nobody got sick. At least not. I asked whether there had been any positive tests, and as Markus said, we had 2 tests, and they were for people who'd been away for the weekend and gone to a party in Florida. Whereas we've worked for weeks and weeks practicing good habits, hand washing, masks, social distancing, and it seems that I guess if there's a revelation, it's that life can continue something approximating to normal if you abide by those rules until we, wait for a vaccine, wait for whatever saves us from this horrible thing. You can live, it's not much fun wearing a mask, as Markus said, but you can live and work approximately normally if you abide by those simple rules. And it's amazing that people are not. Our crew was very disciplined, and everything worked out pretty well.
This may not be applicable to the productions you guys were working on. I was going to ask, was your I know some productions are hiring a company to run COVID compliance. So if any of you have had that, were they prepared to deal with the complexity of your production? The outsiders, the non-production people, were they prepared for the magnitude of the job?
I mean, ours took 2 forms. Disney has formed a sort of health and safety executive, which administrates what's going on in the shows, but also they employ a cleaning company that's got all the certification to deal with the COVID aspect of it, fogging stages, fogging bathrooms, having guys sort of like painting the Golden Gate Bridge by going around high touch areas, round and round and round, coming back to the first one they touched and polishing it again. So it's a 2-pronged attack. It's overseeing the crew, but also overseeing the cleaning of the equipment. I've watched all of the lights and all of the equipment being subject to UV, those special UV light things, and all the fogging and the cleaning. So yeah, that's a sort of an adjunct to the normal filmmaking organization.
And I imagine that as day one, the way things are dealt with on day one are probably not the way things are dealt with on day 50. I suspect that everybody learns as they go, that there's certain things they should do a little more of, a little less of, earlier, later kind of thing.
On our show, we took advantage of actually having 2 days before we went back to camera, we actually had a dry run. Took everyone onto the location, had the chance to kind of, it was a preload and lighting day, but we brought everyone, all 150 people. How long would it take to get everyone through? What are the gaps? What are the problems? So it's making it more streamlined.
Yeah, and I think part of the problem, obviously, as in normal life as well, that people tend to get complacent. So you have to remind them constantly, every day, till the last day of shooting, that they have to wear the mask and follow the safety protocols, because basically they're just like kids, aren't they? So if you don't remind them like 10 times a day, they will just do what they've done the last 20 years. And I think that, so obviously it will get to them with the next show, and the longer you do it with them, the longer you work with masks, the easier it will get. But that, I think that's a problem, or at least people have to think about that from day 1 till day 80, you have to remind people 10 times a day, wear a mask, don't touch each other and stuff like that.
Wash your hands.
Yeah, wash your hands.
There's that concept that Jim Economist, the safety officer, goes on about, the normalization of risk, where people get complacent. If they do the same thing over and over, they get sloppy. And so I think it's incumbent upon the health and safety people to remind people every day that it's literally a matter of life and death, and not to get complacent about it.
I know for me, just on our little scout with 10 or 12 people a few weeks ago, I realized how closely I stand to people when I speak. I mean, one of the guys on our crew had a little walking stick, and he would just push the walking stick out when you got a little too close. A question that popped up in the chat for everybody is, what do you expect next year to be like? Especially the countries that were hit hard by COVID, like Italy or the UK. Unfortunately, we don't have Georgette to tackle part of that. But what do you guys think, based on your experience? What are you seeing for next year? Any changes? Anything different?
I think we're going to be with this for a while.
Yeah, I mean, it seems that left to our own devices without a vaccine, it's not working. You know, the ill discipline, certainly in America, of people continuing to party, continuing to sit close to each other in bars and restaurants, that's causing these spikes. So it seems as if the only thing that's really going to diminish this is a vaccine. I don't see what else will do any good. It's because they've tried reopening the economy in all the countries, and that hasn't seemed to work. So I fear that the vaccine is the only thing that's really going to diminish all this.
Yeah, I think one potential problem with the vaccine is, depending on when it comes out and how it comes out, I know a lot of folks are saying that they're going to be reluctant to take it, at least initially, because I think there's been so much rhetoric in this country about the vaccine and how it's going to be played out, that a lot of folks are saying, I'm going to wait a couple of months and see if people get sick from it, if it really is effective. So I think some of our politicians have done a very good job of working against the vaccine. And plus, I think it depends also how many vaccines come out, if one comes out or 2 or 3 come out.
And if it even works. I come from a different perspective from everyone, because in 2003, we were crippled by SARS. It's a little different this year because the whole world shut down, but we watched for a year our entire industry disappear because of the SARS disease. So the SARS, which is, COVID-19 is an offshoot of it. So, I mean, it did come back. I mean, that there never was a vaccine. We're still waiting for the SARS vaccine from 2003. Eventually it petered off, which this one won't, but we adapted, we moved on. And just to jump back to Ilt's point, we were prepared for the fact that the next year is going to be a disposable world. Trash, everything will be thrown away. We were telling everyone this to be prepared. It's not going to be the green initiatives we all had prior to March. Throw them out the window for the next little while. They can't exist until we figure out a way to keep this down.
Hopefully those politicians who've done such a good job sowing doubt about vaccines will be in our rear view mirror in a couple of days' time. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, I just turned the TV off. So I've been listening to the latest. How different were your protocols for interior locations versus exterior locations? Were the exteriors, were you allowed a little more freedom as far as the protocols?
No, because the same rules apply. Even if there's a bit of wind, who knows if the wind's blowing the vaccine downwind to somebody standing a few feet away. So because there's so little known about how this all works, the same protocols were employed. They were probably policed more rigorously interior, but No, I mean the masks, the 6 foot distance or the 2 meter distance, and the hand washing. I think we were advised that get in those habits and stay in those habits, whether you're inside or outside, because otherwise it becomes, where are we? What are we doing? Obviously people know whether they're inside or outside, but obviously just getting in good habits and staying in good habits seems to be the way to go.
And so for folks who haven't worked yet, like me and most of the crew I'm going to be working with, it's going to be a little ramp up time. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people asking folks to step back, or please put your mask on, or don't, clean that after you touch it, kind of thing. I think you mentioned cleaning equipment and stuff. Were the electricians responsible for cleaning their own equipment? Grips responsible for theirs, or were there folks that came in to assist with that?
It was an outside company in conjunction with each department. Obviously, the camera department were very careful, and they were generally wiping down their own stuff, but in conjunction with an outside company who had all the HEPA vacs and the electrostatic wipes and everything like that. So, and again, each department met with the health and safety specialist, the medical specialist, in conjunction with the production specialist, so they knew what to expect and knew what was expected of them. So it was a combination of a cleaning company working with the departments.
But are you any of you using those UV lights? Yeah.
For certain pieces of equipment, they are.
Pardon?
For certain pieces of equipment, they are being used. There's some inherent safety concerns with them. It has to be in a sealed off area where there's no one around. So I know one of our armorers in town has his own little UV light tent that he brings with him on set to sterilize all of his guns.
Because I saw UV, but that was pretty expensive, UV robot kind of thing, which does like UV flashes overnight in sets and stuff. But you haven't seen those.
We use that.
Yeah.
On stage.
And does it work? Or I mean, nobody knows if it works. So,
I suppose on the law of negative returns, yes, I suppose.
Yeah.
So for the UV lights to work, as I understand it, the light's actually got to hit the surface. So it's got to hit if it hits the front, it's got to get around to the back and hit the back as well. So that's where those robots, I guess it's sort of a random number kind of thing. It moves around and blasts the light in every direction, and hopefully gets most of the surfaces. A couple more questions from the chat. Sort of changing topic a little bit. What are your favorite locations to shoot in? And do you think those locations are shootable in the future with the way we've got to deal with COVID protocols?
For who's that?
Anybody.
My favorites are big exterior ones: Wadi Rum in Jordan, Petra in Jordan, the pyramids, the Great Wall of China. So I think those would be my favorites, and I think they'll notwithstanding who's around, those sorts of the big exterior locations will be just fine. Again, if the protocols are adhered to.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's a joy. Scouting has become interesting now because with all the limits on how many people can be in a certain space, music venues, bars, clubs are all empty. So they've become, it's almost like a Christmas in July for some of the stuff you need.
Yeah.
You can get any concert venue you want right now. There's no concerts going on. There's no sporting events going on. You need an extra stage, go to a convention center. Hotels are offering floors where they never used to let us in the door. It's very odd right now.
We have a hotel in Oklahoma that basically would give us 20 rooms last January, who are now giving us the whole hotel.
Yeah,
we are seen as a cash injection into every local economy to help them out.
Yeah.
We are drinking lemonade from their lemons.
Yeah. Do you guys think you will rely more, and this is maybe more for Markus and Ilt, who travel a little more than John does. Will you rely more on local location scouts and managers to do at least the initial work before we send folks from LA or New York?
Yeah, definitely. So
Yeah.
I've done that for the last couple of months, basically calling my local contacts, and they do the preliminary work, whereas otherwise I would have gone myself, but now I rather stay at home or look at the computer. Yeah, it's like that, and just limit the travel.
And the one thing I should, I'm just ramping up on something else now, doing some, as it were, virtual scouting. And one thing that I'm going to be asking for more is for the local scouts to examine the logistics of a location. Whereas previously I like to go, because I location manage and scout, I like to go and do the scouting myself to make sure that I wasn't being stuck with locations that were unshootable from a logistical standpoint. So I think that's that part of the brief that we give to local scouts is this something where we can set up a base camp in the time of COVID? So there'll be an extra element that will be requiring of them to show us the parking that's around us, show us the way to and from the set, not just the set, not just the location itself. So again, everything's seen through the prism of COVID and through the prism of health maintenance.
Interesting. Do you guys have any idea how much your company spends or spent on COVID protocols? I know the number that my production's talking about is $15 million for an 80-day shoot.
All right.
And that includes testing, all the additional equipment and personnel needed for cleansing, things like that. You guys have any idea what you're spending per day or per episode?
So the biggest expense for us is obviously the tests. So if you've got a crew of 300 times or 300 people who test every day, which is like 50 euros per person per test. So that is 15,000 per day, isn't it? So 15,000 per day times 6 days. So that's 90,000 per week,
yeah.
just for the testing bit of it. And then obviously you need the staff and blah, blah, blah. So it adds up definitely. So
I spoke to a friend who worked on episodic television, and they reckoned that for a $3 million an episode pattern budget, they were spending an extra between $500,000 to $600,000 an episode on testing and all the various things, that additional additional vehicles, additional parking and everything. So I don't think there's any empirical data that I've seen yet, but it's not an insignificant sum, put it that way.
Just testing alone. I mean, here it's $144 a test. We're testing 200 people every other day. And there's 35 shows in where I am right now.
Wow.
It adds, yeah, the numbers add up very quickly.
I assume those of you who have actually been on a production, how do you find, I assume you're using like a zone or a pod concept. How's that working out? Is it working out fairly well?
Yeah, I mean, what's happened is that the health and safety person who deals with the crew has gathered everybody together every morning and said, "Good morning, everybody. I'm going to talk to you about a matter of life and death. Your life or your death, you choose." And that's got people's attention very quickly. And they've said, stick within your pod. Stick within your pod. Keep your equipment in a particular area. Don't commingle with other pods. And and obviously there's this thing where there's the A pod near the camera, and the B pod is the rest of everybody who doesn't go near the camera. And everybody's been wearing signs around their neck, A or B pod, and sometimes A, B, or C. And people have been, very good about that. So I think people are getting it. People are getting it.
You're basically, everyone's finally learning that if you don't need to be there, don't be there.
Right.
You don't have to hang out anymore. You're there, we're all there to work. If you're supposed to be in that area, be there. No more loitering.
Yeah. The amount of flirting at the craft service table has gone down.
But you wouldn't recognize anyone anyway. They all look the same now.
Finally, we found an answer to the craft service problem. Have a coronavirus. To me, craft service is always just, it's been the bane of my existence for 30 years.
But we don't even have a table. We have a truck with a window that it gets passed out to you.
Yeah, that's what we're doing now. Yeah.
Yeah. We're getting close to the end of our half hour. Are there any questions from the folks out there in the ether that we can address while we're here? Or are there any points that any of the panelists want to bring up, things that we haven't touched on?
Feels okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. None so far. No more questions. Okay, folks. Unless there are any more questions that pop up in the chat, and none of us have any more pearls of wisdom, I would really like to thank everyone for joining in today. I hope that I know we're at the end of your day. I hope that you've had a really good conference. Hopefully next year we can do this in person. I know a lot of us are just anxious to get to some locations. Most of us have been sort of constrained, and a lot of us are looking to hop on a plane and go across the pond. So thank you all very much for participating today. Be safe. Be safe. Be safe. Stay 6 foot away and wear your colorful mask. So with that, I'm going to sign off and begin my day.
Okay.
Thank you all very much.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.